Okay, so for my Socratic seminar alternative assignment, I'm going to be picking 3 questions from the Socratic seminar, and I'll be responding to them. All these questions will be from The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Any textual evidence that I reference, if I give page numbers, will be from this version. And let's get started. Number 1 says, do you think this novel is a great American novel? Yes, I do. How does it compare to other works by American authors we have read so far this year? So I do think that Mark Twain's novel Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is a great American novel. Ernest Hemingway once wrote, all modern American literature comes from one book by Mark Twain called Huckleberry Finn. So many of the social issues, including racism and hypocrisy in society, as well as unequal gender roles, are still relevant topics today. There's still topics that need to be discussed and are discussed a lot. And I think that a novel that has as many timeless lessons as this is, of course, important. We see developments from where we were during Twain's time to now, and obviously that's great. But I think the way that Twain represents these issues with such a satirical light allows us to not be confronted with the issue. It's not like he's shoving it in our face and saying, look at this. He's making jokes about it. He's making light of the issue and saying, hey, maybe take a look at that. And I think that that's what makes this book so appealing and so makes these issues such an easy. I think that him bringing light to these issues in such a light way makes them it allows us to be able to connect and learn from it easier than it would be if it was like a painting and it was confronting us with those social issues, because there would be no way for us to look away. Rather, with the way that he depicts it in this book, we can say, oh, it's just a children's book. I think that one of the novels that we've read earlier this year, Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, is most similar to this novel. I think because of the longing for freedom that we see in Huck, Finn, and Jim's character, that is most similar to the main character in Their Eyes Were Watching God. And I seem to have forgotten what I was going to say. The way that we see their longing for freedom is different in all 3 characters. Zora Neale Hurston, in her novel, her character longs for freedom from herself, from the oppression of society, the expectations that we put on women and wives, and how a respectful woman should be. She, wants to be independent. She wants to find herself, and, she wants freedom from these oppressive and almost people who are against her individuality. She wants freedom from that. Jim wants, freedom from slavery. He wants his family. He wants to be able to make his own choices. Huckleberry Finn, his longing for freedom is seen more in the way that he wants to go out and do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, which is like most children, but he wants freedom from that civilization that is continuously trying to tie him down and tell him what is and what isn't. And again, we see his longing for freedom in the way that he tries to get away from his father, which is reasonable because he is an alcoholic and abusive father. But that longing for freedom that Twain puts in both Jim and Huck, I think is very similar to the main character in Their Eyes Were Watching God, and I think that that's important. For question number 2, we have, what are 2 arguments that Twain is making in the book? So, obviously, he's addressing many social issues. He's stirring the pot. But I think 2 of the biggest arguments that he's making is the hypocrisy that we see in society, and again, that longing, like the idea of freedom. So for hypocrisy of society, I got one quote in chapter 3 on page 14. It says, I went and told the widow about it, and she said the thing a body could get by praying for it was spiritual gifts. This was too many for me, but she told me what she meant. I must help other people and do everything I could for other people and look out for them all the time and never think about myself. This was including Miss Watson as I took it. I went out in the woods and turned it over in my mind a long time, but I couldn't see no advantage about it, except for the other people. So at last I reckoned I wouldn't worry about it anymore, but just let it go. So, of course, adults are always going to tell children, or people are always going to tell other people, you have to look out for other people. You don't think about yourself. You put other people before yourself, and you do what you can for your society and your fellow neighbors and your friends, and that's just how life works. That is false. We do not see that in society a lot, unfortunately. From then to now, we do see more societies and neighborhoods coming together and doing good things, doing great things, changing the world. But, it is very hypocritical of Miss Watson to say, you don't think about yourself, you only do things for others, when in fact we do not see a lot of the adults in this book doing that. In society we don't see that. So Huck Finn turning it over and saying, I only see that as an advantage for other people and not for me, making a joke of it, saying, oh, I just won't think about it anymore. Really, that's Twain showing us we don't do that, and we need to. We say these things and we expect other people to do them, but we don't do them ourselves, and we often don't even expect other people to do that, because deep down we know, is anyone really going to do it when you suggest it? And I think that's one of the things that is a big problem in society. We are very hypocritical. We say, don't litter. That's a horrible example, but we say don't litter and we throw our trash on the floor. We push and push and push for all these improvements and all these things that need to get better for mental health, mental awareness, ourselves, our well-being, but what are we doing to help ourselves? We're telling all these other people that you need to be doing this to help this and this, but what are you doing to help? And I think that's one of the things that Twain knew was not simply going to go away, and will never simply go away, because people in their nature are very hypocritical. The other argument that I mentioned was freedom. So of course, during this time there is slavery. So it's common for us to automatically think African Americans want to be free. Yes, and they will be. But the idea of freedom that I think Twain is trying to bring light to is not just that, but also the freedom of normal people. That normal people like Huck Finn, a child, can feel trapped, can be put in situations where they are not free, where they are oppressed. Women, we do see some gender inequality roles, and it is still common. It is still an issue that we deal with today. And I think that through that longing of freedom that I previously mentioned, that he puts in Huck and Jim's character, he's giving the reader that sense of, we are this country built on freedom, and yet we don't see enough of it, which again could be said to be some of his satire, could be part of his satirical elements. We're this great country of America who fought for freedom and are founded on all men are equal, and yet we see African Americans being enslaved, and yet we do not see enough freedom with the choices that people make. Huck feels he has to run away to be free. Jim has to risk his life to be free. This country that was built on freedom, there is not enough freedom. And I think that that's one of the things that is important that we look at today as well. Of course, we don't see slavery anymore. We don't really see segregation anymore. But I think to forget about this is detrimental to the development of our country and our mindset. So him putting this in his novel is a way for him to say, don't ever forget about this. And I think that it'll always be something that is important for us to learn from. And for question number 3, it is, how do you think the story would have been different if Huck knew Jim was free all along? So I think if Jim were to have been free all along, then a lot of the racist situations that we see, racist and dangerous situations that we see Huck and Jim encounter would not have never happened. Rather, they would have been changed drastically. I say that these racist encounters would not completely disappear because we cannot forget the time period that Twain chooses to set this novel in. African Americans are still seen as property in the mindset of the typical, the average American is simply completely different and far more racist than we see in today's society. In Huckleberry Finn, we see some of this from his father. So one of the quotes from the novel, it's, when they told me there was a state in this country where they'd let that nigger vote, I drawed out. I says, I'll never vote again. I says to the people, why ain't this nigger put up at auction and sold? Twain 33. So, this shows the mindset of most Americans. The fact that an African American, something that's meant to be property, not a he, not a she, and it, could be free and could vote and could have those rights that me, an all deserving white American citizen, has. It's just flabbergasting. So I think for Jim to be a free African American in this novel rather than a slave fleeing, trying to be free, I think that it would change the severity of the racist situations, because it's not like he is running away from his owner. He is being put in these dangerous situations and could risk getting caught and risk death. If he was already free, the danger of the situations would be completely different, which I think personally would be a lot better for a child like Huck Finn to endure. But I mean, it's necessary for the novel, for what Mark Twain was trying to get across. If he were to have been free, I think one of the biggest things that would have been affected is most definitely him and Huck Finn's relationship. Because I think Huck Finn and Jim's relationship is extremely important, not just because it's an African American and a white boy who create this bond, this emotional and genuine bond. It's the fact that it's a human and human relationship in this time of, every man is almost for themselves. They go through dangerous situations together. They do all these things together. They're helping each other. At one point in the novel, Huck says, I never thought that I would humble myself to this black man, but I did, and I don't regret it, and I never did after that. That's not something that was common. And not just the fact that he's this black man, that he's this enslaved black man. He's someone's property. He's someone's something. And he humbles himself to him. A white boy humbles himself to this piece of property, If he were to have been free, I think that would have been completely different, that feeling of I'm making a connection with this free man, Yes, of course he's African American. Yes, of course that is still controversial for an African American to be free. But for a slave and a free boy to choose to help this slave, I think that connection is something that is far more important than this free African American and a free white boy, I think that the dynamic of the two would have been completely changed, and the message, the way that people perceived everything that they went through, it would have been completely different. You don't just, you see this danger in trying to help a slave. And if he were to have been free, yes, of course, it's still dangerous because you're traveling with an African American man who's free, and that's not a popular idea. But the way that they connect through this, in their longing for freedom, the way that both of them want to be free, is something that taking away from those characters, I think, would be not detrimental, but the way that we see this message, it just wouldn't be the same. And I, of course, think it would still be an amazing novel. I'm not taking that away from the novel, but changing the dynamic of the two, I think, is something that shouldn't be done, and that's, I think, exactly what would happen if Jim were to have been free all along.